LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
When I was a Christian, the central ethos for me of Christianity was about loving thy neighbour, was about compassion, was about God showing his love for mankind and us trying in his image to show love to each other. So forgive me for wanting to throw up as I read this to you. This is Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General of the United States, a Trump appointee, just a week or so ago, defending the Trump administration policy of separating children from their parents at the border by citing the Bible. You couldn't make it up. So let me read it to you. I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government because God has ordained them for the purpose of order. That is a Christian man, the Attorney General of the US, quoting the Bible to defend the wrenching away of children from their parents. And that, for me, almost more than anything that has come out of the mouth of Donald Trump, strikes me as particularly twisted. And even Trump this week was forced by the sheer power of public opinion, of public outcry, to reverse this policy, even though he had claimed that it couldn't be reversed because or by way of an executive order. In the end, he did issue an executive order and he did reverse his own policy. A whopping great U-turn from a man who hates admitting that he was wrong. 0345 6060 973. Unless you have not been paying any sort of attention to the news this week, you cannot have helped to hear the heart-rending cries of children separated from their parents on the US-Mexico border. And that is a Donald Trump policy. We've heard quite a bit of whinging and whining from Trump fans this week. They're often accusing liberal-minded people of being the whiners, of being the whingers. But they've been doing a lot of it. And they've been claiming this week that there is a mainstream media conspiracy against the Donald, and that he is the victim of terrible bias, and that things, they argue, were just as bad, or nearly as bad, perhaps, as they were under the Obama administration. But somehow the mainstream media has got it in for Donald Trump. Well, things undoubtedly were pretty tough if you were an illegal immigrant during the Obama years. But there is an important difference here, and that is that it was the explicit policy of the Trump administration to separate children from parents. And if you doubt me, and that's not to say that some children may not have been separated at some point from their parents under the Obama administration. You won't accuse me of partisanship or bias. But it's different, because this seems to have been it doesn't seem to have been, it was a systemic policy under Trump. And if you don't believe me, well, you can hear it from the horse's mouth, or at least from the mouth of his Attorney General, John Sessions. Let's have a quick listen to him on the 7th of May, just a month or so ago.
If you are smuggling a child, then we will prosecute you. And that child may be separated from you as required by law.
So that, unquestionably, was the policy of Donald Trump's administration. And Trump, for weeks now, has been blaming the Democrats. He's been saying it is their fault. And he's also been saying that this policy cannot be changed without Congress's help. It cannot be changed, he said, by an executive order from himself. And guess what happened just a couple of days ago? He issued an executive order, finally bowing to the howls of protest from people across America and indeed across the world. This was a step too far, even for the Donald, who now claims that he doesn't like to see or hear these noises, the noises of children being wrenched or having been wrenched away from their mums and their dads. Meanwhile, our very own Nigel Farage was stateside this week, championing Donald Trump, egging him on, encouraging him to continue to be tough on illegal immigrants. Should we have a quick listen to to Nigel in full flow.
So it's very easy to be compassionate. But you've got to understand that in the case of America and these borders, many of these children are actually being used as a means to get other people in, many of whom aren't even their families. Trump has got to stay tough on this and ignore all the screams coming from the liberal media.
So that's Nigel Farage telling Trump, essentially, it seems to me, to continue with what I would call a barbaric policy. A policy that brings the scenes and the sounds that you might associate with refugee camps in war-torn countries to the shores of the United States. Our very own Nigel, marching across the Atlantic and telling Trump, mate, you're doing a good job. Well, even Donald Trump has had to change that policy. And the reason he's had to change it is because, as I say, people don't like listening to small children crying for their parents after having been wrenched away from them by border guards. And indeed, a Democrat called Ted Lieu said in the House this week that these sounds, however painful, and they were so painful, I should probably even give you a warning before we listen to them, but they were so painful that they brought one American newsreader to tears. She couldn't finish her sentence as she was presenting a story on this because it is so heart-wrenching. So should we have a quick listen to Ted Lieu, who is insisting in the House that we have to hear these heart-wrenching sounds. Let's have a listen.
Imagine being ripped away from your mother or father and not knowing if you're ever going to see them again, and then being placed in a detention facility with strangers. Imagine the horror and fear you will see doing that. What must that sound like?
The gentleman will suspend.
For what reason, Madam Speaker? Why are we hiding from
the
American people?
The gentleman will suspend. Per Rule 17 of the House.
Where 2,300 babies and kids in detention facilities were ripped away from their parents. I think the American people need to hear this.
It's very disturbing to listen to that. And I thought, I don't know about you, but I thought I heard the word mummy. So the idea that these children are simply being smuggled across by traffickers, that they are being used so that people with nefarious motivations can get across the border into the United States, for me, doesn't ring true. That's not to say that there won't be some people smuggling. Undoubtedly, there will be. But what human being decides this week to make their focus a complaint that the mainstream media is biased against Donald Trump, instead of making their focus a desire to get these children back to their parents? It strikes me as utterly bizarre that we now live in a world where there are people who are prepared to take to the airwaves and to take to social media in defence of Donald Trump as if he is the victim. And I find that quite sickening. But you may disagree. Let me know if you do. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. Well, let's go to Abbas in Redbridge. Good morning, Abbas.
Hi there. Good morning, Matt. It's a bit of a sobering night, actually. I'm actually quite upset hearing some of the calls. Relating to the last call by Mark, he mentioned they were fed and watered. That sounds a lot like a dog, quite frankly.
Do you know what? I was going to make that point myself. And to my shame, I didn't make that point because someone on Twitter this week accused me of being overly literal on my show last week when I said that there was a chap who called in and he said that the streets were littered with Somalis. And I said that that is not an acceptable way to describe human beings, to describe them as littering the streets. And someone attempted to call me out on that on Twitter and say I was being overly literal. And that's the worry. If you listen too much to the sort of rubbish you get on social media, there's a risk that you start stepping away from your values. And I quite agree with you, Abbas. Talking about human beings being watered, it's sinister.
Absolutely absurd. And Mark mentioned they're not being smacked about. Well, let's say if they were smacked about, would Mark support that? He probably wouldn't. I think some of your callers, however, hearing them tonight, may possibly actually even go as far as that. Now, the reason why you wouldn't accept them being smacked about, because we would say, oh, well, that's abuse. But we now know, because hopefully we are a little bit more educated now about these issues, that psychological abuse actually can be far more damaging and have long-term effects on a human being than a bit of physical abuse can.
Think of the effects, just for example, of a divorce, something as routine as a divorce, the separation of two parents. Think of the effect that has. If you are, anyone out there listening this morning, if you are the son or daughter of a divorce, if your parents got divorced when you were a kid, think back to what sort of effect that had on you, how traumatising that might have been. And then think what it's like when you are in a foreign land, having travelled 1,800 miles with your desperate parent, and they are ripped away from you at the border, and you are put in a disused warehouse or what have you. That's the picture that we've been painted this week.
Well, and the thing is, you said to Mark, well, I believe they're not being abused, but the reality here is that if there's no choice in a particular situation, then you can argue that point. But where you have choices and you choose to lock them up, you choose to separate them from their families, then it is abuse.
And we should point out as well, Abbas, or I should point out, as we have on Twitter at LBC, the UN has said Trump's policy of detaining children may amount to torture.
Absolutely. And, I'm absolutely sickened by Farage and his total defence of Trump, regardless of what he says and what he does. I mean, he keeps asking people, has Trump done anything good? Well, what he should be concentrating on is all the bad that he's done. But according to people like Farage, and a lot of these UKIP supporters, Trump's the best thing after sliced bread. It's utterly shocking, I think, and it's disgusting how we as a race, in 2018, with all the education, the sophistication that we have, we can't see that when people sleep hungry, their lives are threatened, where they have problems. And remember, a lot of these problems are created by international banking, dodgy loans, corruption, much of which that we ourselves in the West are involved with. We're not innocent in this entire web of world politics and deprivation and taking advantage of countries around the world. We are often the cause behind many of these things. I'm not saying we need to be living in constant guilt and feel that we're doing everything bad and wrong in the world. We're clearly not. But a lot of the responsibility does lie on our shoulders often. And these people are desperate people leaving with their children. And is this how we're going to? I'm not saying you have to let them all in. Of course, there has to be a robust immigration policy, but it has to be humane.
Abbas, thank you very much.